Welcome to this Maundy, Thursday service. Does anybody know why it's called Maundy, Thursday? It's a weird kind of name, right? I'm not sure if you're stretching or raising your hand. Okay. Yeah, it's from a Latin word that translates, or in English is command. It's the same root that we get mandate from, Maundy, mandate. Because when he said in John 13, right, he said, "A new command I give to you, that you love one another, just as I have loved you. You should also love one another." The new command. But that night, just like at Mount Sinai, where there was the Mosaic covenant given, and as part of that whole process, they had the Passover, and they had the law, right, given to them, and that's how this covenant started. He gave them a meal, and he gave them some commands. So on that night, he also gave us a meal, the Lord's Supper, and some commands. That one, mainly. And he'd been given other ones throughout his life. So anyway, that wasn't what I was going to talk about, but we are going to share in communion later. I have my notes electronically, so I wanted to talk about a couple words that are kind of churchy words, and if you have been in church in a long time, you're probably familiar with them, and you maybe have some baggage attached to them that may or may not be all right. And I know I do. I mean, I've had to shed some of that. I probably still am. The words are judgment and atonement. You don't use when was the last time you used atonement in your weekly conversation with your coworker? Yeah. And if you haven't grown up in church, or you haven't been in church for a long time, then they're I mean, some of these words are they have very specific meanings, right? Like faith and atonement and holiness and glory and all this stuff. And so I just wanted to talk about, because atonement is what, Jesus' death is about. But I wanted to start with judgment, because I've just been thinking about this recently, and I'll start by making this statement, that we tend to think of judgment and love as kind of opposites of each other, like two sides of God, like he's maybe bipolar. Or God is the judgment. God the Father is the judgment side, and the Son is the love side, or something like that. And they're not really opposites. But depending on what kind of church you grew up in, or era, or country, kind of your upbringing, you might emphasize one, or you might emphasize the other. Usually we might, around here, my type of upbringing, and maybe most of you, we would say things like, well, yeah, there's a judgment, but love wins out in the end. And even just saying that, wins out, it's like they're both fighting or something, like they're both opposites. But I would say that the opposite of judgment isn't love, it's apathy. So, this isn't my example, but someone gave it to me, and it's a good way of thinking about it. So if you go to let's say on your walk, you take morning walks, and let's say on your morning walk you walk by an elementary school, and let's say one day you're walking by and you see a group of like 4 6th graders, and they're kind of got a 2nd grader in between them, and they're kind of pushing him around, they're calling him names. They're grabbing his backpack and throwing the contents on the ground. And if you as the adult walked by and said, well, you know, God love them, kids. I'll overlook that, you know. It's okay. I may have done that when I was a kid, or I may have, you know, I understand where they're coming from. Would that be the loving thing to do? No. I should make some kind of judgment and say that's wrong, both for the sake of, not just for the sake of the second grader, but, you know, maybe for the sake of the sixth grader, say, look, you guys, you can't just keep treating people like that the rest of your lives. I hope this isn't a pattern, and it better not become one, because, you know, it's going to cause problems for you. But if I just left, if I just said, you know, and just walked on, that's not love. That's apathy, right? So you get what I'm saying? Love and judgment aren't the opposites. What we want, a God who makes judgments, right? Our world is like a pretty screwed up place because of us. We've vandalized God's good world, and so we look forward to a time where all wrongs will be made right, where there's a final judgment rendered. I mean, don't we? Or else what hope is there for this world? You guys tracking with me? What hope is there for this world if there's not an expectation of a God that will make a judgment that will say this is right and this is wrong and it can't be allowed to continue? So here's the rub, though. If there's no hope for the world without a God that renders judgment, right? But also, if we have a God that renders judgment, there's hope for the world, but there might not be any hope for me. Because guess what? I've done that. I've vandalized God's good world. And if he's going to judge what's right and what's wrong, I've been wrong. I've sinned too. Right? So there's that thing. We want a God who is going to say this is right and this is wrong, but we don't want him to say it about me. Right? I wish I was always the right one. But if he's going to be fair and equitable, there's hope for the world, but not for me. So that's where atonement comes in, right? And atonement is the word is kaper in Hebrew. I forgot the Greek word. It's a Greek word that's only used a few times in the New Testament in Greek to talk about. It's translated atonement in some translations, like the NIV. Others use propitiation, an even stranger word if you haven't grown up in church. But it means the same thing. So atonement, right? And that's how we have hope for the world and for each of us too. And there's a really nuanced meaning to the word in Hebrew, and also some meaning that I think we've attached to it over time. Maybe not everyone in this room, or maybe not anyone in this room, but I'd wager yes that a few of us have this thinking. So, and by the way, when people take a word and in English and divide it into weird pieces and try to make a saying out of it, I'm one of those guys that usually gets annoyed by that. I remember somebody saying, universe, uni means one, verse means song, it's God's song. And I'm like, no, that's not what universe means. But they were trying to be funny and whatever, but I'm just one of those guys that gets annoyed by that, because maybe I'm just too much a by-the-book guy for some things, no, that's not what it means. So I heard one time somebody say, atonement, at one meant. It's being at one with you. And I was like, what? And then I looked it up. It turns out that's actually the meaning of the word. In the 1500s, it came into English, and one meant, or at one meant, is like in harmony, right? We're at one, we're in harmony. So that's what the English word means. That we're together, right? Our relationship, so there's some relationship that's good, right? Maybe it wasn't good. And you did something and now it's good. It's been atoned for where there's atonement. There's at one-ment. But probably the best regular English word to use for the Hebrew word is to cover over. To cover over. Right? So let's say we go out to lunch once a week, me and Scott. And let's say one week I forget my wallet. And Scott says, "That's okay. I forgive you. It's okay." Right? So he's covered that. But then the waiter or waitress will come and say, "That's nice that you forgave him, but here's the check." Right? So then Scott says, "I'll pay." And so he's covered that, right? And that's what, right? Let's say I ding someone's car. Let's say, I'm a Israelite and I steal someone's sheep or whatever. I mean, I got to pay back the sheep, right? I mean, that's the to cover over that offense, to atone for it, I have to make some kind of restitution or something, right? To cover over that. But there's more than that, because let's say the second week we go out to lunch, I forget my wallet too. And Scott pays. And then let's say the third week I forget my wallet too, and Scott pays. Well, it's more than just the check now, right? Now there's something going on between our relationship where he's like, "Nate, are you doing this on purpose? Or can't you set yourself for like, what's going on," right? And if we're going to atone for that, to cover that up, that takes another level of like forgiveness or whatever for him to go week after week, "It's okay, I'll pay," right? So what happens is, I lie to somebody, I cheat, I get angry unreasonably and abuse someone verbally or whatever. I got to restore that, but I've also vandalized God's world, and I'm not right with God either, right? And so this concept of atonement in the Old Testament is to cover over that, and it was with animal sacrifices. Why is that? Well, in Leviticus, don't have to turn there. I know you all love to read Leviticus and you have this memorized. Leviticus 17:11. "For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it to you on the altar to make atonement for your souls. For it is the blood that makes atonement by the life." So there's life in the blood, and it's a symbol. The life in the blood makes atonement for my life, right? And there's that. It's a powerful symbol that the Israelites experienced, right? To say, one, there's big consequences for my sin, like this animal is going to die. And I don't know, you read those. If you read those Leviticus and talk, all the different sacrifices they had to do. I think one of the things I think is like, man, that could get expensive, real quick. Like they're allowed to if you can't afford a sheep, you can in some of them you can bring a turtle dove or a pair of turtle doves. But there's also like some grain offering. It's complicated, but I think, man, that could get expensive real quick. and there's consequences the stakes are high when I sin. But then there's also this sprinkling of the blood that was also symbolically, right, cleansing kind of this space that maybe I've vandalized by my actions. I've corrupted God's good world. And so the thing is that we, because of pagan worship or something like that, this thing sneaks in which says, God's mad at me and he wants to kill me, or needs to kill me, because I'm unrighteous and unholy. And so here's this animal that God's going to kill it, and then he'll be appeased, so I don't have to die. And that is what atonement is. Because God was angry, wanted to kill me, but then this animal died. Or for us, Jesus died. But if you read the Old Testament, and if you read the New Testament, that's not what atonement is. Like, there's several things wrong with, like, what I said just then, every bit of it is wrong. Right? It's God saying, I am committed to covering over your sin because I love you, not because I hate you. Like, or else why is he obligated to do that? He wasn't obligated to do that. Maybe in a way because he made a promise that to Abraham that through him all nations would be blessed, right? And he was committed to the Israelites, but they also kind of broke the terms of that, covenant. Although God's promise to Abraham was outside of that. So maybe he not completely in the right if God wanted to do that, but yeah, I mean, there's nothing that says, well, why bother? I mean, remember that at one point he drowned the whole world because he didn't want to bother or something like that. Yeah. He hates sin, but he doesn't atone for sin. He doesn't cover it up by an animal sacrifice or by Jesus' death because he hates me or wants to kill me. It's the most loving thing that he's doing. He's saying, I'm going to provide a way for this. And in the New Testament, John, writing about this, he says this. This is 1 John 4:7. Beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God, and whoever loves has been born of God and knows God. Anyone who does not love does not know God, because God is love. Are you hearing a theme here? In this, the love of God was made manifest among us. Listen up. In this, the love of God was made manifest among us, that God sent his only Son into the world so that we might live through him. In this is love, not that we have loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son to be the propitiation, other translations say the atonement, for our sins. Beloved, if God so loved us, we ought also to love one another. He's saying this is how do you know that God really loves you? And he's not just saying it, and it's not just a feeling, right? And he says doesn't say this is to demonstrate God's putting up with you, or to demonstrate how big God's wrath is that he had to kill his own Son or something like that. It says this is how we know God's love, because he sent his Son to us so that we might live, and he sent his Son to cover over our sins, to atone for our sins. It's not because he hates you and wants to kill you. It wasn't like God's up there with the knife and I'm on the table and then Jesus jumps in front. No, Daddy, no. And takes the hit for me. Like he was about to strike me down. He loves you. And that's why he provided a way to cover over the wrongs we do to each other, the pollution that does to his world, and that's why he did it, because he loves us. So on Maundy, Thursday, where we're remembering that Jesus died for us, that he was eating this meal that reminded everyone there about that lamb whose blood was put on the doorposts so that the angel of death would pass over that house. And then that next day, he died and was sacrificed for us and covered over our sins, provided a way for that to be atoned for, so that death would pass over us. And I just want to, there's just little, it's hard to understand sometimes, and in the verses in the Bible, and it's just it's an archaic word, and we're talking about a culture with symbols that don't mean much to us, like it did to them, like this blood and everything, right? We don't do that in our normal day-to-day life, but they would have understood that from a normal day-to-day life, right? Not just church life like we understand it now. So that's in a nutshell. I've given you kind of what is it they call it? Those superfoods. Is that the right word? The blueberries and nuts and stuff that are like hyper nutritious. Those one's one of those buzzwords. So I've said a lot in a few minutes, is what I'm saying, but I'm really giving you a seed, and I just want to put out there, just meditate on that. Ask the Lord, like, is my thinking sometimes veering off onto what you really did, and kind of shaping it to something else from my past or from my upbringing or from whatever, versus what you really did. And so with that, I just want to I want us to, take communion tonight and just remember what a wonderful thing he did for us. That he loved us so much, that provided this way. He's so committed. Like I said a while back, it's the best thing I have. I have some good things going for me. My wife, my family, my friends, but the best thing I have going for me by far is that God is so committed to rescuing me and picking me up and covering over my sin and reshaping me into his image, like no matter how much I fail at that. He's so committed to that.